Well, hello everyone, and welcome to this webinar on building a member engagement strategy for your cooperative. My name is Lisa Buckner, and I'm the Education Coordinator at National Farmers Union. National Farmers Union is a grassroots organization with a mission to advocate for family farmers and ranchers through education, legislation, and cooperation. We have a history of over 120 years of cooperative advocacy and education, which continues today through webinars such as this one. Before we dive into today's topic, I want to review some basic housekeeping. This webinar is being recorded and will be posted on our YouTube channel in the coming days. We will be taking time at the end of the webinar to answer questions, but you're welcome to enter any questions into the Q&A or chat box throughout the presentation. If you would like to subscribe to our co-op newsletter to stay updated with future co-op programming, we will drop a link to that in the chat. But without further ado, we are joined today by Kyle White, Director of Education at Cooperatives First, and I will now turn it over to Kyle to introduce himself, his organization, and kick off today's webinar.
Wonderful. Thank you, Lisa. I appreciate the opportunity to connect with you and welcome folks in the webinar. It's good to virtually meet everybody. I'll go ahead and share my screen with you guys. Got a slide deck prepared. Please don't judge my messy desktop. There we go. I was sharing with Lisa before the webinar started. Here in Saskatchewan, we get some of the coldest temperatures on Earth. And lots of the parts of the province have this kind of look at the moment. So hopefully wherever you guys are joining from, it's warmer there. So yeah, I'm joined to talk about building a member engagement strategy, something I think is quite important for cooperatives that often, I would say, gets a bit underlooked. Ideas of membership, member engagement are often something that fall to the back burner as our cooperatives focus on operations. Things like governance, member engagement, those things are harder to focus on, and as a result, maybe don't always get the focus that they look at. So we'll be talking about how to change some of that today. So for those who might not be familiar with Cooperatives First, just a little bit of a background on our organization. Cooperatives First is located in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, and I'm joining you from my home in Saskatoon, which is on Treaty 6 territory and the traditional homeland of the Métis. We work in Saskatoon, but we work all across the 4 Western Canadian provinces: Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Alberta, and British Columbia. We work primarily in rural and Indigenous communities, and our organization is funded by Federated Cooperatives Limited, which is Canada's largest non-financial co-op. It's a wholesaler that supplies the local co-op stores folks may be familiar with across Western Canada. And it also operates the refinery outside of Regina, Saskatchewan. Their investment in us allows us to raise awareness of the cooperative business model and provide supports to groups that are interested in starting cooperative businesses. Since we were created in 2016, we've worked with over 200 projects across Western Canada interested in starting co-ops and helped create nearly 80 new cooperative businesses. We've worked with thousands of folks on co-op education, through our online courses, our resource website, the Co-op Creator, and through our articles and blogs. I'll talk a little bit about that at the end. But in a nutshell, that's what we do. So quick overview of what I'll cover in our webinar today. We'll start off by talking a little bit about co-op governance to lay a bit of a foundation for discussions of member engagement. We'll talk about co-op members, who they are, what their role in a co-op is, and then we'll dive into what a member engagement strategy is, questions you should consider, the onboarding and engagement of members that can be set out in a member engagement, and then we'll round out today talking about some strategies you could carry out in your co-op to both improve member experience and participation, and things that you could include in your own member engagement strategy. And then I'll share some additional resources for folks that want to do some further learning based on what I've been talking about today. So whenever we have discussions about member engagement, I find it really important to start off with a discussion of co-op governance, because member engagement is really quite integral for co-op governance. So getting a bit of a foundation on that, I think, is a good place for us to start. And in my work at Cooperatives First as Director of Education, some of the work I do with our clients really focuses on governance, because building a cooperative, a big part of that is getting a governance model in place that matches the co-op's purpose, which of course is to serve the co-op's members. So getting a good governance structure aligned with your members is a key recipe for a successful co-op. So a foundation for what is governance, simply put, when I think of governance, is who gets to decide what. Who in the organization makes what decisions, and what does their participation in the organization look like? And often in governance courses or articles on governance, we often talk about the board and management. But that's a big flaw, I would say, because the importance of members and the success of a cooperative is really quite fundamental. And the diagram I'll show in a minute, it highlights the importance of members to the success of a co-op. And key for co-op governance specifically is the fact that often people will play multiple roles in a governance structure. If we think about, for example, a producer co-op, we have individuals who are the owners of the co-op, but also the suppliers of the co-op. A portion of those owners will go on to serve on the board of directors. Some of them might fill the role of staffs. So they're occupying different areas in the co-op's governance structure. And to give a bit of a visual for how governance ought to look in a cooperative business, or any business really, any sort of incorporated entity, at the top, the highest authority, we would have the owners of the organization. For co-ops, that would be the members. Always, co-op members are the highest authority. They elect or empower the board of directors, who then hire and empower management, who then hire and empower staff to carry out some of the duties of the organization. But that empowerment creates a two-way relationship, where a lower authority has an obligation to be accountable to a higher authority. So always the directors of the co-op are empowered by the co-op members and therefore accountable back to those co-op members. So what's that mean? I'll talk a little bit about it later, but just keep that in mind. In your own co-op, what does that accountability relationship between the board and the co-op's members look like? For most groups, it takes place at the AGM. For other groups, maybe there's a few more things, but what can we be doing to facilitate that accountability relationship? So let's talk a little bit more about co-op members specifically. As I mentioned, members in a co-op hold the highest decision-making authority. The exact role of members is determined by the co-op. Aside from being the owners of the co-op and usually the users of the co-op's services, it's really up to the individual co-op to determine what its members' role is in day-to-day operations or in more longer-term governance. Usually, that's partially set out in the co-op's bylaws, but may take place in membership agreements or in other policies of the co-op. And a key thing that co-ops should always be thinking about, and boards and management certainly should be evaluating, is, are your members engaged? If there is a role for members to play, are they actively participating in a way that they need to be participating for the co-op to be successful? Some important challenges that boards and certainly management ought to be considering when it comes to members are some of these. In my work, working with co-ops, particularly those that are in the startup stage, we see a big challenge, even with the term member. I always say one of the most common questions I get from folks is, well, I'm a member at Costco. Does that mean Costco is a cooperative? Of course, no. We know Costco is not actually a co-op. the term member is used by all sorts of businesses, such as Good Life Fitness, fitness centers. I think even many retailers have membership programs or member rewards. Really, only in a cooperative does the term member confer ownership in the organization. So whenever I talk to co-op members, I say to them, you know, by being a member, you're actually an owner of this business. You're a business owner. Most people certainly wouldn't associate being a co-op member with being a business owner, when in fact it is. So it's important, I would say, for leaders in co-ops to ensure that their members understand that by virtue of being a member, they have the same rights and obligations as any other business owner. Because at the end of the day, they do. Related to that, not really understanding the full extent and scope of your rights and obligations as a member create a bit of confusion or uncertainty about your role in the organization. And I'm sure folks on the call, on the webinar today, are at least part of one or two different cooperatives. Your role in those organizations is probably going to differ quite a bit. I know certainly for myself here in Saskatoon, I'm part of 3 or 4 different cooperatives. And depending on the size or industry or number of members, my role in those organizations is quite different. In some cases, it's very limited. I'm expected to use the co-op and maybe go to the AGM. That's about it. And in other cases, my role in that co-op is essential for its success. So there's quite big differences between cooperatives and the role of members in their co-op. And if you're not really communicating to members what their role is, you might run into some challenges. One of those, for example, would be member apathy. It's not uncommon, especially in larger cooperatives, for members to be just a little bit disengaged. They're part of the co-op, they support the co-op, but it's very much a tangential thing. It's not something at the forefront of their mind that, you know, we need to be supporting the co-op for it to be successful. They're part of it, but you know, they don't really have the same support that you might see where membership is a bit smaller. We certainly see that, I would argue, in Canada, in larger consumer-owned co-ops and credit unions, where members are a little bit apathetic. Engagement and participation in co-op events is usually quite low. Indicators of that might be acclamations at your co-op elections, poor attendance, or failing to get quorum at your AGM, or issues with sales or the business of the co-op. These things really manifest in important and impactful ways, but again, are often related back to member apathy. We can certainly have conflicting interests when it comes to co-op membership. Of course, people come to the co-op with all sorts of different interests, whether that's people looking to, you know, make a living by their participation in the co-op, or people simply using the co-op to access goods or services they otherwise couldn't receive. There's opportunity there for conflicting interests. A short story, one group that I'm aware of here in Canada, there was a dispute, a labor dispute between the union representing the staff of the co-op and the co-op's board. But of course, all members of the staff were also members of the co-op. And so you have a very, very big conflict, not necessarily a conflict of interest in the legal sense, but conflicting interests that could manifest in very negative conversations. So it's a big challenge. There's always something important to keep in mind is the different interests that a co-op's members bring to the cooperative business. And certainly, again, for co-op leaders to be considering is whether or not they're meeting the needs of the co-op's members. Core to the delivery of the co-op's purpose is delivering benefit to members. It's really the reason we create cooperative businesses, so that we can provide some sort of goods or services or benefit to the co-op's members. When you're not doing that, it's very easy to lose member support, but it's also likely going to hurt your bottom line. So it's going to have very real economic consequences for the co-op. So failing to meet member needs is always something boards and management should be mindful of. So let's get into the meaty bit of why we're together in the webinar today, a member engagement strategy. So what is a member engagement strategy? Certainly not every cooperative will have a member engagement strategy. I would actually argue most co-ops won't have a member engagement strategy. Nor do they necessarily need one, because again, most co-ops are small, most co-ops have a fairly manageable membership size. You might not need a formal strategy. And a membership engagement strategy can look a couple of different ways. It could be an actual formal document. It could be a resolution by the board. It could be a report that comes from the board or management. These things can take many different shapes. But really the core purpose of most member engagement strategies that I've seen or help groups develop, it does a couple of important things. First, it should set out what your member engagement plan is. So it should actually include tactics that's involved with your member engagement plan. And I'll talk more about what member engagement and things like that actually are. But it should actually have a plan with concrete actionable items. It should identify some of the goals of your member engagement plan or your member engagement strategy. Things that you can tangibly work towards, preferably in the longer term. Coupled with that should be targets. So more short term, things that you can tick off every quarter or every year. It should include targets that likely the board, but also certainly staff, can be working towards. And it should outline key processes for your co-op. Again, your co-op's bylaws will have some content about member engagement, but it's probably more important that the board and management tie in more operational aspects in a member engagement strategy, defining key processes with how the members engage with the co-op. So before creating a member engagement strategy, I'd recommend asking some kind of foundational questions, just to make sure that your co-op's leaders are really on the same page when they're putting together a document like this. And certainly ask your members. You're creating a member engagement strategy, it makes sense to talk with your co-op's members. But I would say have that discussion as a leadership team first, because folks will often need quite a bit of direction, because you're the ones that are, in the thick of it on a day-to-day basis with the co-op's governance and operations. Leaders are probably best poised to direct some of the conversations with co-op members. So questions to consider: what is the role of members in the co-op? And again, the type of cooperative that you're operating will kind of inform this in many ways. And I'll give a few more suggestions afterwards, but what role do you expect members to play in a day-to-day basis, as well as more governance, longer-term basis? What's that look like? What obligations do members have to the co-op? And again, these may be formal obligations that you have to complete as a condition of being a member of the co-op, but they can also certainly be a bit more implicit. Certainly using the co-op, patronizing the co-op is foundational to its success. So that could be an obligation. What obligation does the co-op have to its members? What things does the co-op owe its members in both its bylaws or its membership agreement? What's that look like? What does the co-op try to do to satisfy members? And those things kind of get at what value does the co-op provide to members? Having a very clear understanding of what that entails will be quite helpful for then moving on and building out a member engagement strategy. So let's talk a little bit about some of the content that would go into your member engagement strategy. And I kind of break these out into 3 key components. Whenever I do a workshop with our clients, talking about bringing members into the co-op and building a member engagement strategy, I often break it down to these 3 sections: member outreach, member onboarding, and member engagement. Let's talk about those. So let's start with member outreach. And from a practical perspective, member outreach is the the process of reaching out to members and creating an opportunity for them to become a part of the co-op. And when you're outlining this in your member engagement strategy, start with your bylaws. The bylaws should outline at least the foundational process for how you should be reaching out to members. Of course, co-ops have open memberships that are open to individuals or businesses that can use the cooperative's services. But in there, is there anything else that you ought to be doing? Starting with the bylaws will give you at least a good foundation. From there, you should be identifying who your prospective members are. Based on the purpose of the co-op and the work that you know you'll be doing, what does a member look like? Are they a farmer? Do they own a corporation? Are they an individual who needs to access goods or services? Are they a different association? Are they all of those things? Having a bit of a profile for who your prospective members are will help you then identify how you can reach out to them. From there, you should really prepare your pitch or message. And I don't necessarily just mean your elevator pitch in describing the business, although you should probably do that too. But how do you convey to individuals that they should become members of your co-op? What sort of messaging will resonate with the people who will use your cooperative's services? What can you let them know about being a co-op member that will best position them and your co-op for success? You should also then identify the different channels for reaching out to members. And by channels, I mean the different avenues for connecting with people. Back in the day, you'd be putting up bulletin boards and posters promoting your cooperative. Now, of course, we can use Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, online forums, your own website. We can use any number of online tools to reach out to members. In my experience, word of mouth is probably consistently the best way of reaching out to members. Your foundational team and your co-op's leaders are always probably the best position for promoting your co-op, depending, of course, on the size of the business. And then once you've done some of those things and you know who your members are, you know what you ought to be saying to them, you know where you should be saying those things, then you should develop the onboarding process, which is how members will become a part of your co-op. So as with member outreach, when we're developing the onboarding process, start with the bylaws. I'll always say that. Always start with the bylaws, because your bylaws will again outline that foundational process for becoming a part of the co-op. In most co-ops, I think this is true for American co-ops as well, there's usually a 3-step process. There has to be some sort of application that you have to voluntarily become part of a co-op. The board will review and approve the application for membership, and your membership information will be recorded. And usually once all those things are done, boom, you're a member of the co-op. So always start with the bylaws, because they usually will outline at least those 3 things, including some of the details at each step. What does the form look like? Is there payment associated? How often, those sorts of things. There's usually some more details in the bylaws. From there, board management should really identify any additional steps or requirements or procedures involved with that onboarding process. So for example, it might not be that you require an actual formal application. That might be a call that the board of directors makes. In that application, you can collect different information about the member, but you can also provide member information back to them and help them understand their role in the co-op, what the co-op will do, what they can expect from being a member of the co-op. It's a really good opportunity to have some two-way information. You might have additional, more operational requirements for co-op members. I know certainly for worker-owned co-ops, you'll usually complete a probationary period of a month, a couple months, or at least a week or two before you can apply for membership in the co-op. So things like that are good examples for leaders to think out. What additional steps should members go through to become a member of the co-op? And once you have an understanding of what the process looks like, what the steps look like, what tools then do we need to help with the onboarding process? I would say at a minimum, you should have a membership application. And again, this doesn't have to be fancy. By all means, this could be one page. But I often recommend that, you know, you're having people fill out a document. You may as well expand it a little bit and have that application also serve as a membership agreement. And we have a great template for a membership agreement on our website, the Co-op Creator, that provides some of the basic information that all co-ops ought to be sharing with their members, but certainly could be customized to be catered to your own co-op. But really that application or agreement form should at least collect the basic information about the member who's applying. It should make record of their payment for shares or fee with the co-op. It should collect any other pertinent information. For example, if they're providing goods or services to the co-op, what are those? You know, if they're supplying chickens and turkeys to the co-op, you might want to record that there. If they're planning on volunteering or working at the co-op, how many hours, for example, are they committing to? Recording that sort of information. And then again, you can provide information to the members about what their obligations to the co-op are, what their role as a member means, and what they can expect from their co-op, what obligations does the co-op have to the member. You should also create a membership registry. For most co-ops, that's a fancy way of saying a spreadsheet, because co-ops have an obligation to maintain the information of their members so that they can communicate with them. Depending on where you're operating, you may be required to issue share certificates when co-op members purchase shares. We have a handy template of one of those as well if you need one. And then any other onboarding information. So again, that onboarding process is a really good window where you can really connect with each individual member and have that sharing of information, letting them know about the co-op, what its work looks like, what roles of members could be, engage with them in some way and provide some sort of information. As I mentioned, it's an opportunity for education. So when you're putting together your membership engagement strategy, have a thought about key messages that you want to pass along to new members of the co-op. You could certainly use those in your member outreach strategy, but certainly in that onboarding process, you've got a really great window where people are invested, they're engaged, they want to be part of the co-op, they want to learn more. Help them learn more, help them understand what it means to be a member of the co-op and provide that education. And that can look as formal as you want. Some co-ops that we've worked with will have mentoring. They'll assign a member of their board of directors or a member of their member engagement committee to meet with new members, just have a check-in after they become a member of the co-op, talk about membership matters, have a discussion with them, help them acclimate to the co-op. You might have new member meetups where you provide a bit of education. You could have a webinar, certainly. You could provide information pamphlets about being a member of the co-op. Anything that helps members understand their role and helps them through that onboarding process. And certainly I would recommend, and not a lot of co-ops do this, seek out feedback on that process. In your member engagement strategy, you should always be looking for ways to reflect on and collect data and revise some of your processes. So maybe develop a new member survey. You know, after a member has been a part of the co-op for a month or two, send them a survey, get some feedback. What was the process like? What do you wish you had known? What can we be doing to help members in the future? So let's talk now a little bit more about member engagement. Because those first two components, member outreach and member onboarding, those always happen. Those always happen in every co-op, because without it, you don't really have a co-op. You know, you don't really have co-op members. So you always have to do them, whether it's intentional or you're just kind of doing it on the fly. Member engagement, I often conceptualize as something that happens after someone has become a member of the co-op. And it's often, I would say, what gets left off from member engagement strategies. And again, it falls to the wayside for lots of co-ops for good reasons. You're doing other things, you're in the thick of it on a day-to-day basis. It's easy to overlook some of these things. And when it comes to member engagement, I like to think of it in two components. There's really two ways members will engage with their co-op. The first is financial. And this is an obvious one. Co-ops participate financially in their cooperative, first by providing the capital of the co-op, by purchasing shares, by investing in the co-op, but also by using the cooperative's services. So that might be providing the produce or goods for a co-op. It might be purchasing from the co-op, but patronizing it in some sort of way. That's foundational for how a cooperative is going to be successful. And the willingness of members to financially engage with the co-op, I argue, is actually quite tightly attached with the organizational engagement of co-op members. And this is the one that actually gets overlooked a little bit. So I'll focus on that if we're talking about what is member engagement and how you can improve it. When we talk about engagement of members, we're really talking about how do they participate in the operating of the organization, not just from the financial perspective, but how do they help the co-op be successful? For most co-ops, the only time members will really participate in the organizing of the co-op is at the annual general meeting. And even then, they're really only tasked with 3 decisions. They're tasked with approving an annual report, electing the board of directors, and appointing the auditor. For most co-ops and most co-op members, that's it. Obviously, if you're making bylaw amendments or there's things that have to be approved by the members, you're doing that too. But again, that's often a pretty narrow opportunity for members to participate in their co-op. So what engagement opportunities could you provide outside of the AGM? Here in Saskatoon, our co-op association, a consumer co-op, has taken to organizing town hall meetings where people can come and participate and ask questions of the board and learn about what's happening. And hey, there's this opportunity. Are we pursuing that? Let's learn more about it. It's a way to get members involved in the organizing of the co-op, and it creates a two-way feedback. That's really useful both for the members because they understand more about their co-op, but also for the leaders because they're hearing it right from the members. What they need to support the co-op. Certainly, some sort of ongoing communication is quite helpful. Even a simple newsletter or some sort of social media where you can communicate with members in an ongoing way how the co-op's doing, what members could be doing to help the co-op, but again, also reiterating some of those key messages that you have developed earlier, what it means to be a member, the importance of members to the co-op, the role of members. Those are some of the things you can integrate into maybe member-only newsletters. Having meetups is another great way for members to participate in their co-op. Again, the AGM is great, but again, you're at the AGM to do business. Why not have quarterly or biannual member meetups where people can come together, talk about the co-op, talk about their membership, ask questions, learn more, and again, participate in their organization. And again, I've mentioned it before, you've got to be seeking out feedback. Check in with your members periodically, understand how they're using the co-op, what they'd like to see at the co-op, if there's shortcomings or gaps in their expectations. Understanding those things is both helpful for the members because they're going to feel heard, they're going to feel like they're engaged in their organization, but it's also important for the co-op and its leadership because it'll help them respond to their market. So there's a few ways, I mentioned 5 ways to increase engagement, there's 4 there. So some ways to increase member engagement. One easy way, incentivize it. Provide some sort of direct benefit for members. We see this in the housing co-op space quite effectively, where people will receive a small discount on their housing charges if they participate on committees, in the maintenance of the co-op, in the operations of the co-op. It's easy, just incentivize engagement. If you're talking about a consumer-owned co-op, maybe, where you've got a very large membership, why not have a draw, for a gift card to get people to come out to these events or fill out a survey. So incentivize that engagement. Where possible, create community. by virtue of being a part of the same co-op, you're a group with a shared understanding and a shared problem. That's a perfect opportunity to create community, loop in people on matters that matter to them, and create discussions and create opportunity for people to connect. People always want to connect, and you've got a great opportunity when you've got a cooperative. Be relevant. Certainly, if you're serving a specific audience with specific ideas and issues, speak to those ideas and issues in a way that people will understand. It's quite important that you get that messaging aligned with the type of ideas that members need to hear and want to understand. Speak in a language that they're going to appreciate. And increase diversity. This is one that we're seeing quite importantly so, especially in cities where the population that the co-op serves is changing quite a bit. And it's important for folks, if you've got a diverse membership, that you also then see, for example, a diverse board, a diverse staff. You should have that diversity throughout the organization. It's not only good from a membership perspective, but it'll usually help you quite a bit in governance overall and on the decision-making front. So where possible, increase that diversity of thought, of individuals. It's usually a win-win across the board for the co-op. So let's talk about a few other strategies. So you may not need a full-blown member engagement strategy, but what are some things your co-op can do right now that'll help improve member engagement? Well, if nothing else, create some opportunities for education. And it doesn't have to be, a big formal session. Our organization, Cooperatives First, we provide lots of free information about co-ops, co-op members, and participating in co-ops. Please feel free to use any of our blogs or articles or tools to share with your members and provide a little bit of education. We've also got some free courses that talk about co-op membership and making a successful co-op. There's tons of free resources out there in the co-op space. By all means, use those or create your own to share with your members. Use your staff where possible to catalyze that message. Usually in most co-ops, it's staff that have the most intimate relationship with the co-op's members. They're delivering the day-to-day services and the operations of the co-op that are often used by the members. So why not take that opportunity to have the staff further amplify those key messages that you need members to hear? It's a fairly easy thing. It requires a bit of education with your staff, but again, it can have great impacts for the co-op. Create an idea-friendly organization. It takes very little to let folks know that you want to hear from them and that you're open to ideas. Something as simple as suggestion boxes have a really profound impact in the workplace and with co-op members. There's really cool examples from Eastern Canada where, again, just having a suggestion box, it brings such great feedback in real time into the co-op. Let your staff know that you want to know, how are members engaging with the co-op? Are they having positive experiences? Is there complaints that you're hearing again and again? Ensure that people are comfortable with sharing ideas with the co-op's leaders. And again, seek out that feedback, whether it's a simple suggestion box, a membership survey, staff surveys. Ask questions of the people who are involved in your co-op. If you want to improve member engagement, ask how you can improve member engagement. Get that feedback, study it, and use that when changing these strategies. And beyond member engagement, what can your co-op be doing right now to enhance your governance overall? Because really, if you want to improve your member engagement strategy, the longer term goal is because you want to improve your governance and you want the co-op to be successful in the long term. Some things you can do right away, do more than the minimum. Again, you've got an AGM once a year. Don't let that be the only time you engage your co-op members. Look for opportunities for people to connect, do more than is required by law. Where possible, evaluate your processes. Take a look back at that member outreach process, the onboarding process, engagement plans, how the AGM works. Take a look at those processes. Are there things you can be doing to improve your member engagement, to improve your communication? Where can you tweak those processes to make participation a bit more meaningful? Provide training. Again, people are signing up for co-ops without really understanding what co-ops are, what co-op membership means, and what it means, what's expected of them to be a member of the co-op. So provide those sorts of opportunities and help people learn how they can participate in the governance of the co-op. I've said it a few times already, seek feedback. At the AGM, ask people, how did you feel about the election? How did you feel about the annual reporting? Are you satisfied with the amount of information you're receiving from the co-op? When it comes to the longer term, bigger picture idea of governance in your co-op, seek feedback. And again, facilitate diversity. Diversity is so important for how co-ops can effectively respond to challenges and make good decisions. Identify opportunities for facilitating diversity in your co-op at the board level, management and staff level. It's quite effective for responding to some of the new challenges we're seeing in the business environment. So to wrap things up a little bit, how can we help? For groups that are interested in this work, by all means, check out Cooperatives First website. There you'll find some information about our startup supports. We help groups through the entire startup process, from early planning to incorporating, getting a business plan in place to getting them up and running. We provide those hands-on supports for co-ops in Western Canada. But we also provide a host of free online resources that I strongly encourage you to check out, because if you're interested in member engagement, there's tons of resources on there for your interest. We've got a great blog and podcast that we update a couple of times a month. There's some great conversations, stories, and just ideas that you can find on that blog or podcast. If you're interested in Indigenous cooperatives, we've got a whole guidebook on creating a cooperative on an Indigenous First Nation. And if you want to take a little bit more of a deeper dive into learning about co-ops, I would strongly recommend checking out some of our online courses. We've got courses designed for co-op entrepreneurs, co-op professionals, as well as people involved with the governance of a co-op. If you found this talk particularly interesting, I would strongly recommend our co-op professionals course. It takes a look at the membership, operations, and governance of a cooperative to identify how the different actors in an organization work together to help the co-op be successful. And then if you're looking for practical applications, tools, resources, templates, definitely check out coopcreator.ca. There's tons of free resources on there, a lot of them focused on member engagement and governance. So thank you for joining today. I really enjoyed sharing some of these ideas. I hope you guys have some questions. If you don't have questions now, but one comes up later, here's my contact information. Please feel free to reach out. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kyle. I will give everyone a moment to type any questions they have in the Q&A box. I see we already have a few coming in. While folks are doing that, I would just like to direct everyone's attention to the chat. I dropped a link to a really short survey about this webinar. We would greatly appreciate if folks could take that survey just so we can get feedback. It helps us continue to provide quality co-op programming for future audiences. But we do have a few questions coming in. Let's see. So you mentioned that co-op sizes would impact member engagement. Is there a certain size of co-op that should have a member engagement strategy? Is there a threshold for that, or should all co-ops have a strategy?
It's a good question. Broadly, I would say all co-ops should have some member engagement plan, whether it's written down or not, wouldn't matter. They should definitely have some sense of what their member engagement plan looks like. For co-ops that can probably dedicate a bit more time and maybe have staff would be a good measure. Probably having a formal member engagement strategy would be quite important. If you're just a group of volunteers trying to figure it out, I get you might not have the time to get a member engagement plan in place, but having at least an idea, a general set of goals that's shared by the board, I think all co-ops should probably have that.
Great. Another question from Eric. What role do member interviews and spotlights play? When are they useful and when are they not useful?
Good question. Very good question. Arguably, they could always be useful. And certainly depending on the type of cooperative that we're talking about, almost essential. Certainly, I mean, worker-owned co-ops, housing cooperatives, member interviews are really quite important. Depending on the size of your producer co-op, that's equally true, I would say. It's probably a little bit less important if you're just coming together for, say, marketing and sharing like a marketing space. But definitely, I would say if the role of a member is a bit more impactful on other members and the co-op and its well-being, then definitely having an interview process to ensure that you've got the right fit between the member and the co-op is definitely a good way of building in your onboarding process. Great.
We don't have any other questions at the moment. I will give folks, oh, here's one. Annie, how often should an owner's survey be done?
Very good question. Easy answer for me would be as often as necessary. I mean, again, this will depend on the co-op. You could easily do one once per year after the AGM, even just for like a little bit of information. For something a bit more robust to really get at the member experience, satisfaction from members, 2-3 years is probably sufficient, or even 5 years. Because really, when you're talking about longer term strategic planning or big changes to the co-op, we're kind of talking about years, I would say, in how decisions will be made. So for something more robust, a couple of years, I would say, but probably checking in at least at every AGM would be useful for getting a quick insight that you can use right away.
Great. Well, thank you, Kyle, and thank you to everyone who joined us today. Kyle did mention the co-op creator. I put a link to that in the chat. I highly recommend everyone check that website out. There's a ton of great resources. But if there are no other questions, I will give everyone the top of the hour back. Thank you, Kyle, for joining us and presenting on member engagement strategies today.
Wonderful. Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, everyone. It was great to virtually meet you guys.
Have a great day. Bye.